a very individualistic, selfish, focused thing where sex has, free sex has empowered humans to be really immature and not focus and not like have the self-restraint and self-discipline to partner up in a way that is sustainable for society.
Warning, this podcast is for entertainment only and not intended for medical purposes.
In recent years, very recently really, I don't think it's gotten a lot of airtime, just probably until the last couple of years. There's been these new critical voices saying that the women's liberation and sexual liberation movement of the 60s and 70s was a bad idea and has been really bad for everyone.
Oh.
So let me try to fairly simply summarize their main arguments.
Okay.
Because they have some good points. They're not just idiot Christians who are just no sex before marriage. It's not that simplistic thing.
Okay.
It's not Jesus doesn't want you to have sex. That's not their argument. Their arguments are really good. And I'm not going to be able to do them justice here in a brief thing, but I'll try.
Okay.
One is that before the sexual liberation movement, when everyone sort of thought you couldn't have sex before marriage, the institution of marriage was a really solid cultural structure. And as a result, children grew up in homes where a dad was the breadwinner, a wife took care of the kids, and just the quality of the child rearing nationally was way, way, way better than it is now. And the theory, essentially, if I simplify, is that when the feminist movement sort of gave women the right, and the pill gave women the right and the liberty to do what they want, have sex if they want, do whatever they want. It sort of that really started the dissolution of marriage, and the dissolution of marriage has been catastrophic for child rearing, particularly for boys, just kind of in terms of a structured family with two involved parents that raise the kids with discipline, and then by the time they're teenagers, they're mature, self-disciplined. It's kind of like this sort of Freudian idea is that humans kind of have these primitive animalistic sexual urges, and we need culture to contain and structure them. And the women's lib sexual freedom movement fucking dissolved that structure.
Okay.
So there's two main arguments.
Yeah.
That's the one main. The second one is that with that, you hear a lot these days of people talking about how dating apps suck and dating sucks, and there's all these women who are 37-year-old doctors and they can't find dudes, and just how dating is so fucked up. And the basic idea is that women are biologically what's that word where women want to marry up?
Hypergamy.
Yeah, that women are biologically hypergamous.
Yeah.
And so they're always trying to look for a guy who's better than them. And dudes are, but women, as women surpass them increasingly educationally, the numbers get less and less. And so all the women are competing, and because of dating apps and the internet, all the women are competing for this small slice of men. And so then there's all these men that don't have any ladies and are incels. And just the whole dating thing is fucked. Everyone's alone, miserable. And the people are, in a pretty sophisticated way, the people are saying that ultimately originated when we sort of liberated sex from marriage.
Oh, okay. I don't quite get the second point. I do understand the whole field of, or the phenomenon of dudes ending up kind of, the majority of men stuck with not good selection of women, but then that always puts me into question of like, where are all those women, the unattractive women, right? Like why did I say that? As if there's a group of unattractive women who then are like, it just points out my own fucking horrific like bubble that I live in. And it's like, but whatever. At some point, it's stupid to try to shield and pretend that your views aren't what they are. Fuck
Right.
it. I don't give a
Totally.
shit, right? Like,
Yeah, so where are all the unattractive women?
Yeah.
They're at home swiping on Tinder, and they're swiping left on the 90% of the guys who would actually be partners for them. And then they go on the Kevin Samuels show, and Kevin Samuels is like, "Lady, you're average at best." And she's like, "What? I'm a queen."
Yeah, a queen, and no. So, like, if I understand what you're saying, that, like, this is not what I thought you were going to talk about. The idea that, okay, this sex-positive society has destroyed child rearing. Like, because in this 80s, there was a split between feminists, sex-positive feminists versus sex-negative. Remember, back in the day, there were these feminists who were like, oh my God, we're against prostitution, sex violence, pornography. It was a big pornography thing, right? Where they're like, oh, this is all based on the oppression of women. So they were all sex negative, right? And then came the sex positive crew that's like, oh no, like female sexuality is to be embraced, and you got to explore your sexuality as a woman, really embrace it. The orgasm was like the big word of the fucking decade. And so, like, everyone was like, oh, orgasms, G-spot, like, oh, all these kinds of, like, female anatomy in like, suddenly then everyone who grew up in that time, you and I, were just like, what are these parts? What are these things? Right?
It was a decade of clitoral education.
Yeah, I mean, so
it was the decade of the clitoris.
Decade of the clitoris. Yo, it like, and I was always like, oh, okay, this is a good idea, following this trend. But then I was also like, this whole sex positivity thing is like highly female focused, and where the fuck is the male sex positivity? Because in general, people were seeing that men are sexually aggressive by nature because they get boners. And when you get a boner, you get all these weird hormones that make you think the person you're with that gave you a boner, you are in love with. It makes you have fucking emotions. Like the hormones cause you to have feelings that are stronger than are real.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And that's a phenomenon very, very ever never spoken of. It's like, yeah, dude. Well, they speak of it as like, oh, that's the little head talking, and it's like, yeah, but what the fuck are you talking about, right?
Right.
But so I don't mean to derail this by bringing. I would say that should be a side subject. Is like, eventually let's get to male sex positivity. But in the meantime,
yeah, I agree. That's another good topic.
Yeah.
But so back to this topic. Simply put, the decade of the clitoris, the liberation of the clitoris, seems like a good thing, that like women's sexuality finally gets to like have its day in the sun, and women's sexual experience and sexual pleasure people become aware of it. But there's this wave of criticism saying that has unleashed basically like a very individualistic, selfish, focused thing where sex has, like, free sex has empowered humans to be really immature and not focus and not like have the self-restraint and self-discipline to partner up in a way that is sustainable for society. Eric Weinstein is a really smart guy, and you wouldn't think, he seems so liberally minded, you wouldn't think he'd be one of these people, but he just talks about how if you uncouple sex from marriage, what happens is basically a polygynous society will be the end result, where the best dudes have a bunch of wives and most of the dudes have no wives. He sort of like says statistically that's going to end up happening because of biologically the way we're formed, is that without this sex and marriage thing is polygyny results, and then polygyny will result in a fucking violent, unstable society.
Okay, if that's true, like, what were the qualities of these really dominant men that you mentioned? Just so that I could maybe prepare and become one of them. Like, no, like, what is he talking? Which men become these guys? Like, what?
Just dudes who are successful and confident and in shape and have social status and social success, wealth, or whatever. That because of polygamy or hypergamy, the women aren't gonna tolerate the lower tier dudes. They're biologically like not capable of doing that, so they're all gonna be wanting the higher tier dudes, and the higher tier dudes by nature are a small percentage, and it just so the lower tier dudes have less and less and less women, and it's just as like unstable for community structure.
Okay, so, the instability aside, if this is true and you end up with a polygamous thing, and maybe it's hidden polygamy like how it is in America today, where it's like dudes just impregnate a bunch of women, but they're not actually their wives, right?
Yep.
Like what you're saying, that this is bad for child rearing because there's no dads involved?
Yeah. Well, and it just, if you just look statistically, correlation is not causation, but if you look statistically, back in the 50s, the vast majority of marriages stayed together and the vast majority of kids were raised by a mother and a father. And then if you look in the 80s, boom, it completely dissolved, and it's particularly in lower income. And now you just think about all the kids that are raised without fathers and outside of wedlock, and I don't have the statistics out the top of my head, but it's like an obvious huge cultural shift.
Right. In some populations it's over 60%. But
yeah.
Why is that bad? Like, maybe dads are stupid and they shouldn't be involved, and they just like...
No, there's been tons of research, really well done research. Warren Farrell is a guy, I think, who's done a lot, but there's been a few dudes who've done a lot of hardcore research on this, and it shows that kids, especially boys, but boys and girls raised without dads do way worse. And basically, I think there's two simple things: is when dads are around, there's more tough love discipline, and when dads are around, there's more like rough housey, just like rough and tumble play that somehow the research shows is really helpful for the kids to kind of become mature.
Dude, I gotta send that to my ex-wife, because on Wednesday, I was going, it was time for him to go to bed, and I was in his room, and I don't remember what he was doing. He had finishing his homework. I don't fucking remember. But at some point, he jumped off his bed and attacked me onto my back. To my response is I stabbed him with a pencil, right? Mm-hmm. And because of this he decided to use his jujitsu and put his forearm into like a choke on my fucking vocal cord. And because I didn't, as I saw him doing it, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't imagine he was actually going to crank into my vocal cords. But maybe he was inspired by the fucking stabbing. And he cranked up because normally when you choke your friends, you put their neck in here,
right?
Which is not that painful. He fucking put his forearm and it popped my larynx, dude. It like it cracked, and I was like, "Oh motherfucker!" And he was so freaked out, and like all apologetic. That, you know what? That's not really the point of the story. The point is like that's supposed to be good for kids. I mean, other than
crucial. The research shows that fathers doing like rough and tumble and like teasing the kids and messing with them and kind of like knocking their ego down and all that stuff is like really, really healthy, especially for boys, but for girls too.
God damn it. Okay, well, that's important, right? So,
Yep.
like in theory, this is part of the argument you're saying is that because the household structures are different, like, did they ever look into the arrangement that you and I have where it's like the kid is with the mom half the time, and so then you get a break as a dad, and then when your kid comes, you get to be
No,
like super dad? Like,
no, and I think that's one of the good arguments against them is I think that what you and I do, which is dads spend a lot, the dads remain really invested in the kids even after divorce. That I think that's percentage-wise such a relatively small slice of the pie that the research didn't bother focusing on that.
Oh, I kind of figured like that would be the new model is, as you know, you get all this time to work on your career, work on yourself, work as a dude. And then it's like, oh, it's time to be a dad. And then you just go full on. You're like super fucking present dad.
I think the research needs to look into that because I agree with you. And that's one of my criticisms of this whole movement is they don't talk about that. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but like, I think there's probably a significant number of dads, maybe not, where post-divorce, the dads are super involved. I think there's probably, but maybe it's 1%. And so maybe 1% is not enough to do research. I don't know.
Well, that seems dismally low. I kind of thought it was
Well, I have no idea what it is.
Like,
but
okay, even if it was 10 or 20%, that seems low. It just seems like it should be the design. Like, imagine if it...
I agree it should be. And part of the point of these people is it's not what's happening.
Okay.
I've probably heard the percentage. I don't know. But when I was working, I was doing in-home therapy with low-income kids a lot, and I'd be out in the low-income communities working with the youth.
Yeah.
And there was never any dads anywhere. None of the kids ever would see any of their dads. It was and the kids would comment, and they'd be like, why does no one have a dad?
Are you serious?
That was like the norm, dude. It was so common.
Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Which part of the country was that?
This is Minnesota, which you would think would be better than average.
Oh, yeah.
And
it's not.
Yeah. So this is the Twin Cities in Minnesota, oftentimes in the suburbs, and in that couple years of work, I probably worked with 30 different kids. 0 dads were present.
Jesus.
0 for 30.
God damn it. Okay, so that is legit, just from your very small data collection in this one city, because obviously there's other cities that would even tilt worse. Some would be better for sure, but okay, on we go into this like idea of this is the product of a sex positive society, right? So the whole point is. It's kind of hard bringing... I really like that you're bringing in all these elements because otherwise it's just a discussion of like people embracing their own sexual exploration for the benefit of their understanding of their expression of being a human being. And that part's really, I think, absolutely crucial to being a whole person.
Yep.
Right? But when you bring in this giant element where you're like, oh, okay, so in the pursuit of you totally understanding the intensity and importance of your drives, like how frequently do you think couples have sex, regardless of whether they're in a marriage or in one of these polygamous type of scenarios where the dude just comes around when he comes around, or the lady comes around when she comes around? Let's stop pretending it's just dudes. Like how much do you think couples have sex?
Well, my guess is I don't know, and I hate to be a pessimist here, but my guess is the sad truth of the majority of the majority of the bell curve is it's like when it's a new exciting thing, like, ooh, there's a new cute person, and then the new sort of flirting, courting phase, boom, then a lot of sex happens. But then after a while, when like disagreements start to pop up in the relationship, sex now falls off dramatically. And that so my pessimistic theory is the most sexually exciting and sexually active time is in that honeymoon phase where they don't really even know each other yet.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So I was listening to someone talk about the stats, and on average, people who are happy in relationships have sex about once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that's coupled sex, right?
Yep.
As opposed to them individually masturbating, right? So
Yep.
coupled sex is approximately once a week, and those are the happy people.
Yep.
So
yeah, and the unhappy people, I mean, there was those recent studies that came out that showed that like a third of men under the age of 30 hadn't had sex once in the past year. So sex is getting less and less, and people who are not coupled or people who are not happily coupled are having sex much less than that.
I think we should have started this by defining sex positive, because at this point, here we are in this like large political, or no, it's a social discussion of family structures and values and social norms, right?
Yeah.
But like when I think of sex positivity, I think of it as much more of this like personal, like ability to embrace your own idea of your own sexuality and how you go about living it out. And
I agree, and I think that seems obviously like a good thing, but it historically has gone hand in hand with the dissolution of commitment and thus the dissolution of the family structure that raises children well. And with this hypergamous relationship thing where there's all these fucking dudes that can't find ladies. So it's weird that this new attitude towards sex where it's like, hey, each person should get to explore their sex however they want, which seems obviously like a good thing, has created a lot of really not good things.
Well,
and I think maybe I haven't really heard anyone say this, but here's kind of my theory: is it's what sex positivity has done, and I don't actually want to use the term sex positivity because that feels like a attitude about sex that seems really healthy, but just like the sexual liberation movement has done is it doesn't reckon with the reality of humans' primitive biological sexuality, which is dudes want to have a lot of sex with a lot of women, and they're going to do that if they're allowed to. And it's like the sexual liberation movement has allowed just the animal nature of men who want to have sex with as many chicks they can. It's like released that from the shackles of marriage. And the men have just gone out and they're free now just to hunt. And so if a woman will sleep with them, they will sleep with them. That's what's happened. And then the women then just become hypergamous, and they'll just end up sleeping with the dude who basically has really good game. Because good game is just creating the appearance of high social status. And the women will get fooled by it, and then they'll sleep with the dude. So the dudes with super good game sleep with tons of chicks, impregnate quite a few chicks, and then move on and keep doing it. And then the dudes without good game don't sleep with anyone.
How again do you do this? Producing the game?
Well, there's fucking tons of YouTube channels devoted to teaching you, dude, and that's another natural consequence.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, like, okay, if that's true, like, why aren't more people, well, men particularly, invested in becoming this from a very young age? Why aren't parents teaching their young men, hey, dude, when you grow up, this is an important drive you're going to have. Here's how to facilitate it. This is how this is how to make yourself a person of high status, right? Like, this is what you do.